A subject that is near and dear to my heart, which is budget planning for the long term. I mean, this is almost why I came to the three-day conference. First, you'll be hearing a presentation from Ken DeRoberts, but do a little housekeeping first. If you're looking for the county breakout class, you need to go to Hatteras 2. Everybody knows what this is, right? Everybody knows what to do with it. And yes, the case is pink. Okay. Ken Roberts began his public sector career as a part-time office worker in Summit's city clerk's office. 10 years later, he was named director of finance, and a few years later, he also assumed the duties of the city administrator. He helped navigate Summit to be one of the first municipalities in the country to achieve a AAA bond rating from the top 3 credit rating agencies, which is a pretty big feat. AAA is almost like county status. He went into investment banking, specializing in public finance, project finance, and asset securitization. Ken has had several successful entrepreneurial ventures, and then one bad one, prompting his return to the public sector. Maybe that's bad for that, but good for the public sector, where he served as borough administrator and CFO for the borough of New Providence. In 2006, he resigned as administrator, but continued to serve as a part-time CFO until his retirement in June. In addition to managing Government Strategy Group, Ken founded and serves as chairman of the Soup Kitchen 411, a charity fighting hunger in America. Okay, and with that, I will leave it to Ken.
Thank you, everybody. Good morning. First, I'd like to share some well wishes to John Reinhardt and the new leadership team for GFOA. They're great people, doing a great job, and as a lead-in, wanting to also thank and congratulate the Fall Conference Committee. I think this is an excellent fall conference. Each year it continues to get better, so I'd like to give them all a round of applause. This morning, we're going to talk about, as a lead-in to budget planning and so forth, strategy. It's one of my favorite words. That's why I have it included in the title of my business, Government Strategy Group. And too often, it's absent from our day-to-day vocabulary. Many of us do it on a daily basis and don't realize it, and maybe not do it on a formal basis. But I really want to help and share some stories with you of how strategy helped the successes in my career. And especially I want to target this presentation today to all the young people in here, the new people, relatively new people in government finance. I mean, there's a lot of great brain power in this room. And one of my mantras that I'll get into talk about in a second is I love when you work smart, not hard. Hard work doesn't prove results, smart work does. So I want to get into strategy. One of my favorite sayings also is a goal without a plan is merely a dream. And as Alice said, you know, what road do I take? The Cheshire Cat goes, where are you going? And Alice goes, I don't know. Well, then any road, doesn't matter. Any road will take you there. So if you don't have an objective, you need a plan, and that's what's going to take you where you need to go. Strategic thinking is generally absent from our public sector vocabulary. We're typically task-oriented. Strategy is not generally part of our toolbox. For strategy, we need to set goals and objectives, develop tactical execution plans, and gain involvement from those affected. That's most important. Strategy actually should be part of the CMFO curriculum. You know, the curriculum teaches you how to do lots of mechanical things, but doesn't teach us how to project manage, doesn't teach us how we can set plans in motion and execute them. There's governing bodies, administrators, and managers who view us as merely accountants, not managers, not executives, not part of the senior management team, but accountants. And many of us are paid accordingly because that's our perceived value. Let's face it, a large portion of our job is like Groundhog Day, actually Groundhog Year. We do the same thing over and over again. We got bill lists, we got payroll, we reconcile bank statements, we do quarterly reports, we do the budget every year. And that's what we're perceived as, being task-driven. It's tough to break those perceptions, but it can be done. I don't have all the answers, but I could share some of my stories, and they all started with strategy. Being strategic can make a big difference in doing your job and also how your organization views you. Here's one of the best examples of being strategic. It's all-encompassing and hits on all elements of financial management and all your fiscal affairs. It's a credit rating process. Yesterday, this is a great follow-up because yesterday I had a couple of very good sessions talking from the issuer's perspective and talking from the rating agency perspective. I see my good friend Doug Goldmacher here from Moody's. The rating agency process, like in Groundhog Day, many finance officers merely do what I call information dumps, data dumps. You get the checklist, you're having a bond sale, and you react, you respond, you do major information dumps. The rating agency gives you the checklist, you gather and provide the information. You do this every time you're having a bond sale, which is every couple of years, every 2 years, 3 years, annually, whatever. You're being tactically reactive. The rating agencies review this information, give you the score. Not many people, we got some insights yesterday, some good insights from Doug and from Standard & Poor's, but we don't really understand the full dynamics of it. And the rating agency process, it's not mystical. They give you all the information. Actually, they give you the roadmap. They publish their criteria and guidelines. They tell you up front what they're looking for, what metrics they use, and how they're evaluating it. So instead of managing your credit ratings every time you're about to do a bond sale or a note sale, start tomorrow. That's being strategic. Be proactive instead of reactive. The credit rating process really is much more than achieving a score or a letter of credit rating. It's a reflection of what you're doing and how you're doing. If you take time to thoroughly understand and read your credit rating reports, understand the criteria, and plan accordingly, be strategic. Start with setting your goals. If you're currently rated AA3, what do you want to do? You want to upgrade to AA2. You eventually want to get to AA1. Analyze and evaluate what sets you apart from the higher ratings. Use the rating criteria as a foundation for setting your strategy. Begin addressing each and every element of their criteria. They're giving you the plan. And you could build your financial management strategy and financial management plan accordingly. As was mentioned, I did lead Summit back in the early 80s to be the first community in the country to be rated AAA by the top 3 credit rating agencies. It started with Moody's, and then we kept fighting with Standard & Poor's because we had, it was some good planning on my part, but I got to tell you, I had a great palette to work with. Standard & Poor's, for the next 2 times we went for credit ratings, would not give us the AAA. They kept eluding us. And they kept telling us, well, look, we don't give AAA ratings to municipalities, especially small towns like you. So by this point, they're having another bond sale. I had just left Summit, went into investment banking, and learned a couple more things. Learned that there's a third credit rating agency out there, Fitch. They're very good, very well known in the corporate sector, not as well known in the public sector. A good friend of mine actually happened to be working for Standard & Poor's at the time and was in charge of general obligation credit ratings for the Eastern US. So I called him up, beat him up to set him up that we want the AAA, I don't want to hear any excuses. So we set a strategy in place. We went to Moody's. We knew Moody's would definitely give us affirm the AAA rating because they wouldn't dare embarrass themselves by giving us the first AAA rating and then pulling it back. We went to Fitch next. Fitch was so shocked that Summit went to them. They said, oh yeah, AAA, no, that's easy. And then we went to Standard & Poor's. After the rating process concluded, my good friend, the head of East Coast General Obligation Credit Ratings, calls me up. Ken, I tell you, you guys did a great job, but you didn't get the AAA. We can't give it to you. So I said, okay. There was a big pause. He said, what do you mean, okay? He said, I expected you to be all excited and upset. I said, no, I'm fine with it. He said, I can't believe you're fine with it. I said, because I'm not going to publish your rating. What do you mean you're not going to publish my rating? He said, don't you want to have 2 credit ratings? You know, one of the things that did come up yesterday, many institutional investors who buy your bonds, if you can have 2 credit ratings, they like that. That's really good. And also, it was sort of mentioned yesterday about split credit ratings. If you have a AA and a single A from the 2 different credit rating agencies, they always price your bonds to the lower rating. So I told him that we're not going to publish your rating. He said, don't you want to have 2 ratings? I said, yeah, I do. And I've got 2 ratings, 2 AAAs already. And I said, but I'm not going to publish yours. And he was shocked and horrified and said, please, give me 24 hours. It turned out to be 48 hours. And what ensued was a meeting of the executive committee of McGraw-Hill, who is the parent of Standard & Poor's, because they had to change policy to give us the AAA rating. But if we didn't have a strategy in place to address this, it would have never happened. So that's how Summit became the first community in the country to be rated AAA by the top 3 credit rating agencies. But being prepared and having all the tools and elements from their plan really, really helps. In New Providence, I put together a financial management plan. I remember just one more story about the credit ratings, and then we'll move on. In 2012, we're doing a credit rating review, phone call with the analyst, and I knew every question that was coming, had everything prepared, everything answered, everything was all set. And then he gets to the last question. He goes, okay, I said, I already know the answer to this question, but I've got to ask it. It's on my checklist. You know, he said, because I know the answer is no, nobody has this. You know, do you have a written financial management plan? And I said, well, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but yes, we do. He said, what do you mean? You know, because only very few people in the country have written financial management plans. And I said, no, we have one. I sent it to you. And he looked at all the material I sent to him. He said, oh my God, you do have one. He said, this is incredible. And we were elevated to AAA by Standard & Poor's that year. Now, I could spend hours on this topic. It's really interesting because the whole framework of the credit rating process is the envelope for which your financial management, your daily financial management for your community, it fits right in it. So start tomorrow. Don't wait for your next bond sale. That's your roadmap to strategic thinking for your community. So let's move on to budget forecasting. First, let's review how most communities engage in their budget process. You know, usually the administrator and CFO collaborate, put together a budget, sometimes with input from department heads, and go through and analyze and evaluate every sub-account. Preceding year revenues are reviewed and analyzed. preliminary tax rate is calculated. The information is shared generally with like the mayor or finance committee. They beat you up a bit, send you back, you make some cuts, and then finally you're allowed to share the information with council in massive binders. Sometimes I've seen some 2 feet high sent to the council, arming them with all this information. And this is when the real fun and agony starts. Many governing bodies then use this information and they hold budget hearings with every single department. These inquisitions are fueled they're like a hurricane over warm water. You know, the governing bodies have all this information, all at their fingertips, and they use it. You know, they get into granular details. Why are you spending $50 more on ink cartridges? Why are you spending more in your finance budget for conferences? Why is the fall conference going up? They'll do that and nitpick on all this and that, but yet there'll be a resolution on the agenda for a $180,000 tax appeal and not one moment of discussion on it. Sounds familiar? This is what goes on in a lot of communities across the country. And they'll make some cuts and then the final budget is adopted. Many of us dread this process, and the poor department heads, when they have to come in, they're no match against that angry mob that they're armed with, because they're armed with so much information that they grill them for hours. So here's the budget strategy I started using. When I came to New Providence back in 2002, let me just set the table. They had 5 consecutive previous years of no municipal tax increase. They had this thing back in the 90s, it was very prevalent, where they had these things called Christmas tree grants that the state gave out, you know, just because the party in favor or the elected officials curried some favor and were able to give you a $75,000 grant or a $200,000 grant. And they used this money to reduce property taxes. And then we had the infamous, in the late 90s, the infamous pension holiday. So they used that again to lower taxes without setting anything for the future. So it was a nightmare. And not only that, but we had this one councilman in New Providence, and everyone has this person, could be a male, female, is on everybody's council. You had Councilman Jimmy. He was a retired internal auditor who served 30 years on council, and this guy remembered every single little last detail and questioned every little thing. You know, he really was fueled. He really engaged and loved detailed information, and especially the gotcha questions. And the council deferred to him because they felt, oh, this guy's the smartest guy on council. So the stories I was told by department heads before I got there from these Saturday inquisitions was horrifying. You know, like our guy was a police chief. They were going through his budget and hammering him on, you know, why are the ink cartridges going up so much? And Jimmy had invoices from the past 2, copies of invoices he had at home for the past 2 years as to the ink cartridges were so much less. Why were they going up so much? And just to crucify the department heads. That was the process. So when I began preparing my first budget in 2003, I conferred with my finance committee chair and I said, look, we've got to change this process. We are not doing 3 all-day Saturday sessions and just torturing department heads. So they come to me and said, okay, and, you know, we did 5 years, no tax rate increase. We want a 6th year. So I said, okay, I knew I had my work cut out for me. But the real reason is, why did they continue this process? And it's largely because that's the way we've always done it. Those dreaded 7 words. And just so that you could read that, this is really an innovative approach, but I'm afraid we can't consider it. It's never been done before. You know, those dreaded 7 words, this is the way we've always done it. When I was the administrator CFO in New Providence, I told employees and department heads, I will fire you if you ever come in and give me that as an excuse or a reason for doing something. So in any event, my challenge was set now for the 2003 budget. I had to not only change the process, but set the table for an incredibly large tax increase, because I had to rebalance the financial equilibrium. So after convincing my finance committee chair that I wanted to change the process, he told me, all right, you have my blessing, but you have to talk to each individual council person, including Jimmy. So I was not surprised at all. When I spoke to every single one of them individually, every one of them hated the process. Well, Jimmy sort of liked it, but everybody else hated the process. So whose fault is that? It's our fault because, like Groundhog Year, it's the way we've always done it. We're accustomed to doing stuff like this every year. So now I had to turn things around. So I ended up succeeding in changing the process. Now I had to change their approach. I had to reorient them from, instead of doing the granular review of looking at every single line item, is I wanted them to set budget policy, strategy, and objectives. Planning. What are your expectations? What do you want to see for this year's budget? Let's start from there. That's your job, governing body. Set the policy, set the strategy. You want a less than 2% tax increase. You want no cuts in services. You want an extra couple police officers. You want no other reduction in workforce, whatever. Just give the parameters and let us put the budget together. The transition was tough because we still had Jimmy to deal with. In the first year, we had a Saturday morning session. I scheduled it on purpose to be actually an all-day session, which I knew wasn't going to take all day. Got them some great coffee and donuts. And I did my strategy and approach for the budget, which was a top-down review. And the council loved it. And then said, okay, anybody else have questions? Now, they all got the binders. But none of the council, everybody else on council was fine. Jimmy said, oh, no, let's go through page by page. And his peers just beat the hell out of him. So Jimmy asked a couple of questions. His peers ended up shutting him down, and we moved on. But Jimmy never liked it. So I turned the budget review process and approval around using strategy. I had a plan. It was a roadmap. I had to reorient them on how to review and what to look at. But in order to do that, I had to provide them with value-rich information. I couldn't provide the same old stuff. Instead of focusing on the cost of ink cartridges or conferences, they had to focus on the key elements of the budget. So I created a few management tools. The first one I created was what I call a schedule of key reserves and surplus, basically our liquidity. It summarizes all the inflows and outflows of surplus, basically taking all the information from your AFS. And then I add to the bottom of that, after the summary of surplus, I add in key reserves, like capital improvement fund, capital surplus, reserve for snow removal, any other unique reserves, reserve for tax appeals, and give them a measurement of our liquidity. But I had to show them historical information to show the trend of how they were screwing things up. And why were they screwing things up? They didn't know any better. They didn't have the tools for which to look at. And one of the things I just want to, as we're going through this, I'm not going to bore you with spreadsheets and lots of numbers and so forth. You can perceive a lot of this in your mind. I'd rather you think of the concepts. And if anybody wants, I've got my cards up here. You could email me. I'll be glad to share you some of my worksheets and some of the documents that I prepared. But it's very powerful when you could show them facts. You could sit there all you want and tell them, oh no, we can't use up all our surplus. But when you show them in black and white the damage that they're doing, it's powerful. In 2003, we had nearly a 10% increase in the municipal tax rate. Once they saw the damage that they did, we had to reset the financial equilibrium, and it would have never occurred if we didn't provide them with this financial autopsy. We moved from killing trees for budget workbooks to giving them only 4 sheets of paper every year for the budget process. It was difficult, even breaking Jimmy's addiction, even though I still had to give him lots of information, but the rest of the council worked on 4 sheets. The schedule of surplus, I did a 5-year rateable forecast, I did another sheet called the bottom line, which summarized was a summary scorecard, and a 5-year budget forecast. The detailed information always remained available, and Jimmy always wanted it. The schedule of surplus and key reserves helped shape the approach going into the budget year, because they could see the trend lines of where we were and where we're going. So in the first year, Jimmy used to then beat me up about the balance in appropriation reserves because I kept letting them build and trying to explain. But by letting them build, this is a predictable source for regenerating surplus, because where we want to get to every year is we want to be great predictors of what our surplus is going to be. And this is one of the key elements. But Jimmy always had a problem with it because he felt that we were artificially building up the budget, and which leads to wasteful spending. So in fact, one council meeting, I used to tell the council, if you have questions, ask me, I'll give you all the information that you need. But Jimmy decided, because he was so frustrated at a public council meeting on the budget, he tried to embarrass me because he went and got his own information on appropriation reserves. Where he got the numbers, I don't know. But he started out by saying that department heads are wasting money because you give them too much money. I said, department heads are wasting money? I said, well, I tell you what, Jimmy, give me the names of 5 department heads who are wasting money and we will fire them. No, give me 3 names. No, just give me 1 name. Tell me who's wasting money, and we'll fire them. Well, I can't think of anybody. Yeah, so we had to shut him down. But I had to fight back because it was important to preserve the integrity of continuing to build the appropriation reserve so that we could get to predictably look at where our surplus was going. That was one key element. So the other thing that we did is the administrator and myself took complete ownership of the budget. We made a deal with the department heads. Said, look, you run your departments, do it with some integrity, don't waste money, don't worry if you don't spend all your money by the end of the year, we're not going to cut your budget, and if there's something that happens where you need extra money, we will find it. We'll take ownership for you. Your part of the deal is just spend prudently. So therefore, we put the budget together. We knew every single movement and element of the budget so that we can plan accordingly. And it worked out very, very well. We told the department heads, we have your back. When you do that, you treat people with integrity and respect, they generally respond. So we put together, the next document was a 5-year rateable forecast. Imagine that. But that helped us because we were getting whacked like crazy with commercial tax appeals, and we had to really get a handle as to what was going on. And fortunately or unfortunately, because of where New Providence was geographically, we were on the Route 78 corridor. And if any of you are familiar with northern New Jersey, back in the late 70s, there had been this missing link of 5 miles through the Watchung Reservation of Route 78. So it was like the road to nowhere. Once that was completed, there was a huge building boom. In fact, interesting statistic is that something like 80% of all the Class A and Class B office space in New Jersey was built after 1980. And the Route 78 corridor from New Providence out to Far Hills, Peapack Gladstone area, had the highest vacancy rate in the state as the recession was beginning to hit. So we did 5-year ratable forecasts to manage our ratables. We had to get a handle on our commercial tax appeals and figure out where new growth was coming. That became a critical element for doing our 5-year budget forecasting. Because you need to know everybody forgets, a lot of people forget about ratables because your tax base is a significant third leg of your tax base. A lot of people focus, in the public, the mayor and council focus on appropriations, focus on revenues. And ratables sort of just happen by osmosis. They really don't pay that much attention to them, but we did. We paid a lot of attention to them. We got very aggressive on managing tax appeals. We hired the best professionals, attorneys, appraisers. We fought every inch of the way in court, filing counterclaims and so forth. And, we could have done a revaluation, and our sentiment changed up until recently because the economy shifted, but as commercial values and industrial real estate values were sinking and we're getting more tax appeals, residential values were increasing. So it didn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that there was going to be a shift if we did a reval from commercial, industrial, multifamily to residential. In fact, I was kidding my good friend here, Doug Goldmacher, yesterday, because he always told a story that I told him because we were doing a rating review several years ago. And he said, so what's the story? When are you going to do a revaluation? I told him, we're going to do a revaluation when the mayor is on his way to jail after violating the court order to do the revaluation, because otherwise it makes no sense to do it, because commercial properties don't vote. My residential properties do, and we can't do a shift in the tax rate. So unfortunately, Doug, we can't tell that story anymore because I think it's time to do a reval. I talked about the summary, the scorecard, the bottom line. It summarized all the moving parts. They had in one piece of paper the comparison, the high-level comparison of the 2016, 2017 budget, what the dollar increase, percentage increases were. And then I gave them little recaps showing, I said, say, a threshold of $5,000 or $10,000. Any sub-account that moved more than $5,000 or $10,000, I just listed them with a little blurb explanation, what was causing the movement and what the amount was, and everything tied in. And then I did the same thing on the revenue side. So that on that one sheet of paper, they saw everything. They had all the movements, what's making the budget go up and down, what's affecting the tax rate. They were able to see it all. So they had the 5-year ratable forecast, the schedule of surplus and key reserves, and then the bottom line. They loved it, except Jimmy. Jimmy still had to go through all the details. And then the final tool was my 5-year budget forecast. Basically, I set up a grid, and I left off the zeros or hundreds of thousands even, just so that it was simpler to read. And I had the baseline budget year and broken major categories: police salaries, public works, anything that was a major expense category, and showed what I thought the anticipated increases would be each year. So like police pensions, was say $2 million, and each year it was going to increase $100,000, just to show, and then calculate out what the bottom line was going to be. And we projected that out for 5 years. And it worked really, really well. Once they saw that document, that whole total package then came into better view. It became 2020 perspective. And it's a dynamic document because you're constantly refining it and updating it. It helps in so many fronts, even in capital planning, because I get questions, well, can we afford to do these ball field improvements? Well, let's look at, see how increasing debt service is going to affect our 5-year budget forecast. I had a finance committee chair as we're doing this who not only was an attorney, he was also a civil engineer. And this guy's penchant for details, minuscule details, was amazing. So when we come into the next year doing the budget forecasting, budget process, he'd bring his files with him. And he said, well, geez, 2 years ago, you figured for 2015, the increase was going to be 1.86%. Here we have that, now it's 1.95%. What's going on? So he really kept me on my toes to make sure I was consistent from year to year. And as we got going with it, we got much better at predicting and analyzing and evaluating what the increases were going to be like. So we provided them management-rich information. And this is what they wanted. And it resulted not only in changing the process, but efficiently setting the policy and the framework around it. So one year, we're working on the budget. And I can't believe I got this done. I said, I think we're all happy with the tax rate increase. I think we need to make it higher. What do you mean? I said, well, look at what's happening next year, because in the next year we had some type of unusual expense that we were predicting that we would be facing. So I said, if we increase the tax rate this year another 0.25%, look what happens. It smooths things out between this year and next year. It doesn't make the increase next year look as dramatic. They bought it. They went along with it. Had I not prepared the 5-year forecast, they would have never gone along with something like that. Can you imagine going to one of your governing bodies without the information fueling at hand to say, look, we need a bigger increase than normal because we may be spending more money next year. But by giving them this information, showing them this mosaic, they were able to grasp and understand the need for it, and they went along with it. The strategy evolved, and we kept refining it. So over the past 4 or 5 years, this is how the budget process went every year. The administrator and I put together the budget. I would then have a 5-minute phone call with the finance committee chair. Mike, we're looking at a 1.69% increase in the municipal tax rate. We'd have a finance committee meeting. Lasted about 20 minutes, which included general BS time, because they had the 4 sheets of paper. It took them only a couple of minutes to review it. Then the finance committee chair would make about a 10-minute presentation to the council. And that was it. No more budget hearings. No more grueling Saturday sessions. It got to the point the past 2 years, the finance committee chair would go, what's going on? Why is this so easy? I told him, Mike, it's because we set policies back over 10 years ago. We charted a course for our financial equilibrium. And this is what happened. So back in 2013, towns were still challenged with surplus. We were rolling in cash. We were in good shape. We had no problem keeping our tax rate increases at respectable levels because we planned for it. We had a strategy, and it was easy. Over 10 years ago, 12 years ago, we put together, as I mentioned, a financial management plan. I mentioned that when we were talking about credit ratings. And when I was on this call with the analyst from Standard & Poor's, and Doug, you can confirm this, that is a very small percentage of municipalities have financial management plans. That boggles my mind because there's nothing magical about it. It just includes and envelopes all elements of all your fiscal policies, internal controls, accounts payable, how you're doing things, what your surplus policy is. just to depart a second, one of the key things that I learned going through the rating review process and understanding it and embedding it into our everyday practices, one of the things that the rating agencies like to see is shorter term debt, if you can keep your bond issues under 15 years and have a rapid repayment schedule. So if you can have a 12 or 15-year bond issue with a 7-year average life repayment schedule, that's very attractive because it's aggressive. So using that as a framework, that's how you're taking their guidelines and embedding them into your strategy. So by doing that, then it becomes easy to do on a repetitive, ongoing basis. So the financial management plan, it's on the website for Borough New Providence. They look at it, we update it every year, it's reviewed and adopted as policy at every council reorganization meeting. And there's no reason why every one of you shouldn't have a financial management plan. So let's recap. Okay. Being strategic makes a difference. Have a plan, be bold, upset the apple cart. Kill those 7 words. That's the way it's always been done. Councilman Jimmy passed this year, but up until his last year on council, he always viewed me with a skeptical eye. He always thought that there was something being hidden. But like I said, we all have a Jimmy to deal with. Nothing we discussed here is rocket science. It's all simple, basic, common sense stuff. And many of you do certain elements of it, but my recommendation is put it all in an envelope, put it together in one master plan. Needless to say, I wasn't viewed as just an accountant. In fact, I'm not a good accountant. That's probably my biggest weakness as a finance officer. But I produced value. And you can too, every single one of you. Like I said, work smarter, not harder. So in closing, before I ask for questions, they said I could put a tip jar out, but instead of a tip jar, I just want to give a pitch, especially as we're coming into the holiday season. Remember the hungry people in this country. It was astounding when I learned more and more about it that 1 in 6 Americans are hunger challenged. And everybody in this room either knows directly or indirectly of somebody who has faced it or is facing it. So I appreciate if everybody would remember them as we get into the holiday season. So that's it. If anybody's got any questions, we still have a few minutes. And again, my email address is kdr@Government Strategy Group. You could email me. I'll be glad to send you any of the information that I used for my financial management plan, for the 4 sheets of paper that we use for developing our budget. And I thank you. You're a great audience. I appreciate the opportunity to share my views, ideas, and stories with you. Thank you.
In closing, I want to thank Ken for his presentation, and please remember to log into gfoanj.org and complete the survey for this course. Also, for